Ever struggle to get students to stop talking, keep their phones put away, stay focused during the lesson, stop whispering during assembly, engage with the coursework? Today's guest can help. Claire English is an experienced Australian secondary English teacher and senior leader, specializing in supporting students with complex social, emotional, and mental health needs. Over her career, she's worked across the United Kingdom and Australia, dedicated to transforming volatile, challenging, and chaotic learning environments into places of safety, support, and learning. She's got a new book out. It's Never Just About the Behavior, which I happily rate at 5 stars and strongly recommend. When you join our conversation today, you're going to hear about big picture shifts you can easily make to help your classroom run more smoothly and productively, as well as quick, small changes you can try immediately for a better tomorrow. Honestly, this is one of my favorite interviews ever, and I'm really excited to share it with you. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. Well, welcome, Claire. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you, Betsy. It's so lovely to be here, and thank you for inviting me onto your wonderful podcast. I have been eyeballing it for quite some time, and just as you reached out for me to come onto this podcast, I was actually going to reach out to you. So it's so nice to be here.
Nice. What a coincidence. Well, I'm sitting here looking at your beautiful book. It's Never Just About the Behavior, and I've just finished it. I read it over my Thanksgiving vacation, and I found it so readable, so honest, so compassionate, and so helpful in the way that it just went step by step by step. So I really understand the routines, the conversations, the flow. And I feel like that's often missing from books in our field. So that was one of my favorite things. It was also really nice for me, and I think for many people listening, that you come to your work from the ELA angle, that you have experience with building safe, positive, productive classroom spaces in ELA. So today I just want to talk about the foundations of your work and then run some situations by you to hear how you might guide a teacher dealing with them. So that's a very long introductory spiel, but does that sound good?
That sounds great. And thank you so much for saying that about the book, because what you've just echoed back to me is like my own, like what I really wanted, like the goals for the book, what I really wanted from that. It's like super accessible, easy to read, actionable, because there's so much of that missing. So thank you for saying that. I'm so happy you read it. And yeah, I can't wait to share some things with your wonderful audience.
Fantastic. Well, let's start by talking about kind of the big picture. We're going to zoom out and look at your overall approach. And I wanted to read back something that you wrote kind of toward the beginning because it made an impression on me. And I think it's really important. So you wrote, "There's a misconception that trauma-informed and restorative approaches to behavior are weak, airy-fairy, and don't teach so-called badly behaved kids the lessons they need to learn. Friends, it is the total opposite. When I say that this approach to classroom management empowers everyone in your classroom, the person that it empowers most of all is you." So let's dig into this a little bit. Can you share what it means to manage the classroom with this restorative mindset?
I really like that you call it a mindset, because yes, restorative practice and restorative justice, it kind of comes with that reparation part. And, there are things that teachers are kind of told to do when it comes to restoration with their students. But for me, a restorative mindset is the idea that we see a behavior as an opportunity for learning, for development, for connection, for understanding. But as well as this, yes, my approach has foundations of trauma-informed and restorative practice, but managing a classroom with these foundations for me actually means that we start to put things in place before we get to those conversations, before we get to the part where we have to restore behaviors. We're putting things in place that actually proactively mitigate and reduce these behaviors. That's why I say it's empowering, because it's not just about us trying to play whack-a-mole constantly and, bump the behaviors down as they pop up. It's, the restorative part, talking to students about what's going on and then putting things in place for us to support every single student. So to say there's a young person who has really complex needs, restoration suggests that when these challenges pop up, we discuss these with that student and we make things right. But to really live this practice in our everyday teaching, we need to think, what can we do next time before this student walks in through that door to reduce the likelihood of that happening, to remove the barriers and equip them with the skills to actually break that cycle for them and for us. That's why in my approach to classroom management, a lot of the stuff that I teach is actually about setting up that stuff before the behaviors happen, because I know that there are certain things that are going to pop up anyway. So the stuff that we can set up actually mitigates those behaviors and stops us from having to go through that whole restoration process, because there's less behaviors to discuss. So a restorative mindset and a trauma-informed mindset for me just means setting up the environment in a way that means that every student can be as successful as they can with the skills that they have, that kind of reduces that mental load, reduces the anxiety, reduces that stress response. And then when it gets to having really important discussions with students, it's the stuff that actually still matters. Like, it's the stuff that we really need to focus on instead of spending heaps and heaps of time on things that we probably don't need to be.
Yeah. That's really interesting. It really reminds me actually of universal design for learning, and the way that when you try to set up lesson plans to reach all different types of learners, you end up benefiting every single student for different reasons. Like if you set up your classroom in such a way that you're preventatively mitigating kind of difficult behaviors, you're setting, maybe your most challenging student up for success later, you're also probably going to be creating a better approach for every kid.
Absolutely. I am such a firm believer in that, which is why I have such a bugbear with the way that differentiation is kind of presented to teachers, because
Mm-hmm.
teachers like see this idea of differentiation and go, "Oh my gosh, how the heck am I going to plan for all of my students?" And like, it's not about that, it's about access, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was really on point in the book when you said, like, I don't necessarily have time to create 30 different lesson plans for one period. And that hit home for me, because as a new teacher, that is how I saw differentiation. And it was quite overwhelming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, I thought we could move now into kind of one of the foundations of building a positive classroom culture, or sort of applying that restorative mindset. And that's kind of when you norm what behavior is going to feel like in your classroom from the beginning. And of course, teachers may be listening to this mid-year, so we can get into kind of what to do if you haven't done this yet and it's mid-year. It's not a disaster, but um, it's very common and understandable to kind of think, okay, I need to set some ground rules, put them up on the wall, make them clear. And when I was reading this part of the book about the dangers of black and white rules, I couldn't help but think about Halloween candy, because of the time of year it is, and my own children, and how I will say, in the past, I might have said you can have 3 pieces of Halloween candy after dinner. And immediately it's like a 2-hour conversation. Like, is Smarties the same as Snickers? Could I have 3 small things instead of a peanut butter cup? Like, the rule becomes completely destroyed by the end of the conversation, because there's so many variations and points where my own children can say, like, that rule needs to be twisted in this way. And I think, it's a silly story, but it's what happens in the classroom. You make a rule and then the situation changes. You make a rule and then there's somebody who really needs you to break the rule for them to be okay. And you get twisted all over the place. So how can teachers avoid making rules that they'll end up having to change a million times?
Oh, I love I love that story. It's so on point. I've got a toddler, so I'm just kind of like projecting into my own future, but oh my god. Yeah, absolutely. Like, it makes so much sense what you're saying. That's why I don't set rules necessarily. I set kind of values and norms, because those don't change. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't change that we make, like, when you say to your children, like, we're going to make some healthy choices. Well, that is a norm and an expectation. And that means that you're not breaking the rules to say, okay, we're going to have a balance and have 3 pieces of Halloween candy tonight, because there's balance in that. But rules rules do change, the rule of no eating in class, like, oh, but let me bend it just a little bit for this child who's coming late without breakfast. I'm going to slip them an apple and send them to the canteen, the rule
Yeah.
of no calling out, don't call out in class. Well, unless there's an emergency and you're going to spew in your seat, there are
Yeah.
too many variables because we're human beings. Like, I could have a rule for myself that I'm not going to be late to class, but I'm going to have an accident that morning. And like, there's too many variations in rules. And I think that rules can be really based around equality, which is great, but it's not equitable. So it's not about providing the stuff that we need for our students. So, and by the way, if you are sitting there in mid-year and you're going, oh my gosh, like I feel like things are super chaotic and like things have gone out the window and my rules just aren't sticking, you can press that reset button at any time during the year. There is absolutely no shame in doing that or no problem in doing that. You can do it in the last week of school if you want. You are the leader of your classroom and you're at the helm. But at the start of the year or mid-year as a reset or whenever I feel like it's needed, I just collaboratively, and collaboratively is definitely the operative word here, set a bunch of expectations with the class for myself as the teacher, for them as the student, all of the crossovers for us as human beings. So I always start with me, like, what do you expect from me as a teacher? Like, what is reasonable for an expectation? Like, well, miss, you show up on time, you're prepared to teach us, you're kind to us. And then I might say, okay, well, actually, I'm thinking about something right now that you're missing. Like, can we also have an expectation for me that, if I don't do this, then I'll do this, so I'm adding to that conversation. And once they've got that buy-in, because I'm normalizing the idea of expectations and, the norms in the class, I'll move on to them. Okay, then what might I expect from you as a student? What might your peers expect from you? So, that I try with my work, that I show consideration for others in the room, that they're, whatever it is, like whatever you want to be establishing in your classroom with your expectations and norms. And with them, there might be some that they don't say either that I think is really important. So I'll say, hey, everybody, like there's a couple that I thought of. Can anyone think of any more? Can I suggest one? So it's really this collaborative process. And then from there, we dig into the fact that we're human. I say, are we always able to meet expectations? Why might we not meet expectations one day? And then that naturally leads into this beautiful discussion around, okay, well, when we don't, what do we need to do? Like, what makes sense for this? Like, what's reasonable? How can we make things right? What's fair? And then that gives you just so much more buy-in when it comes to those expectations not being met. All of a sudden, it's this wonderful discussion around, remember when we were speaking about those expectations, it's okay that you didn't meet them today because you're human, whatever else is going on. But when we don't meet expectations, like, what do we need to do from there? So it just brings this human element into the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. It just feels like you're giving them a voice, and then their voice is going to kind of, what's the word? Just kind of cushion them later on when they do have trouble. It's part of the process of being a student. Everybody messes up sometimes, it's not like, oh, you broke the rule, now this happens, it's just like, oh, we talked about this, now we need to kind of make it right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you don't have buy-in, you've got nothing.
Yeah.
You've got
Yeah.
nothing. If the students haven't bought into you as a human, if they haven't bought into the expectations, you've got nothing when you sit down to talk to them. So this whole process is just about building trust and building those relationships and actually building a little bit of buy-in. And before that whole process, I even go as far as to say, like, what are expectations? Expectations aren't like a school thing. Like, when you go play your sports on the weekend, what does your coach expect of you? Like, before you go to bed at night, like, what's the expectation there? So really normalizing it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I wanted to talk about one of my favorite phrases in the book, and it's this idea to get curious, not furious. I would say that staying calm and being curious felt like a really key foundation in your approach as I was reading the book. And actually, it reminded me of my mother. We talked about this a little bit over email, but always when I was frustrated with somebody as a kid, she would immediately be worried about what was going on behind that. And I would be like, Mom, we're mad at this person. Like, stop. We're not worried about this person. We're mad. And she'd be like, well, what if something is going on? Or I think their mother is sick, or I think their parents are getting divorced, or and I'm like, okay. And she sort of slowly wore me down, because at first I was just like, but this person is being really mean to me at school. And she would always be worried about both of us, And so I really want to talk about this. What does it mean to get curious about students instead of furious? And why does that matter so much?
It's just, I can't get over how beautiful of a foundation that your mum gave you when it came to that. Like, emotional intelligence is such a skill that we need to learn as human beings. And if we're not modeled that by our parents, it can be really difficult to learn it in like it's obviously a learnt skill, but to learn that later in life. So what a beautiful foundation your mum gave to you, by the way. But,
Thanks, Mom.
yeah, thanks, Mum. So first up, it's really hard to be curious, not furious. And I think that you kind of highlighted that, as a child, like, I want to be mad right now. And it is really fun just being mad. And your mum reminds me of one of the first leaders that I ever had, because I was a very young leader. So I became a head of department in my second year of teaching. And
wow.
I had very few skills of my own and I had a really tough upbringing, and I wasn't regulated myself, and I really struggled with, staying calm. And I had one particular staff member that was very challenging, very, very challenging. And I, oh gosh, 15 years later, and I'm still like, oh gosh. And I went to my mentor, and I respected my mentor so much. Actually, she was one of the ones that I dedicated the book to. And she said, Claire, like, she must be pretty sad. Like, what's going on for her? And, it just, and she said, like, it's your job to kind of find out. It's your job not to find out what's wrong, but like to kind of understand that if somebody is acting in that way, and like there must be a lot going on for them. And that was the first time I was like, because when you're talking about the kids, like with students, it was a little bit easier for me because I was there, I was that student. But when it came to staff, I really struggled with it. So she was definitely the one person that kind of helped me to see this idea of curiosity in a different way. But it's very, very hard. But it's like not even about knowing what's going on for somebody at all. It's, likely we're not going to know what the reasons are beneath the behaviors. Like sometimes the students, like most likely the students aren't going to know either what's going on for them beneath the behaviors. It takes a lot of self-awareness and self-reflection. And the students that come to us with like the biggest behaviors, they probably don't have that. I think about myself as a student. I didn't have that level of self-reflection to know why I was acting in a certain way. It's a mindset, right? Of like, okay, there's the behavior, that's the tip of the iceberg, and there are things that I can't see. It's just an awareness around that, whether it be that the student's dysregulated and they're in that fight, flight, or freeze state, whether it's they're trying to meet their needs in whatever way that they possibly can because one of their cups is depleted. So because it's so hard for us to keep regulated in the classroom, it's just a way for us to stay in our thinking brains using our prefrontal cortex. And that's important because if we're not doing that, we're likely to then approach things with the emotional part of our brain. We're far more likely to escalate the behaviors that we see in front of us. So when people get the advice of like, don't take it personally, I hate the advice because they're not provided the skills. They're not taught how to not take it personally. And behavior is so inherently personal. Like it feels that way. Yeah. So this strategy of like remaining curious and thinking about what's beneath the behavior is just a really great strategy for us to stay regulated, stay in our thinking brains, and remind ourselves constantly that the behaviors that we're seeing in front of us, there's always something beneath them. We're always driven by something.
Yeah. It reminds me of teaching theater and how we always invite students to consider how each character is behaving based on their motivation. Like every single moment when you're acting, you're supposed to be thinking about the motivation of the character because everyone wants something all the time. Everyone's bringing like their past experiences all the time into the scene. And like just thinking about that in the classroom, maybe you've got 30 different people who had 30 totally different mornings, totally different weeks, years, lives, obviously, that they're all bringing their needs, their history. And I like that clarification that it's not that you're going to lean down to a student who's making things tricky in your classroom and say like, what happened morning that's making you so angry in my class? Like, it's not that kind of curiosity. It's just a straightforward question. It's just the idea that, like, you think something is really going on here. And I may not know what it is, but it's not just that this kid hates me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just this idea that we're just keeping that hat on for ourselves and for our family and our friends, and
Right.
it's just a really great way to it's just a skill of emotional intelligence, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to go from there to a really funny part of the book where you talked about what happens if you do kind of go up to a kid who's making things tricky for their own reasons, and you go right up and kind of confront them publicly in front of the class. And you wrote, "Hello, escalation. Hello, fight or flight. Hello, lose, lose." And that just really struck me because it can feel really tempting to be like, "Okay, something is happening. I need to stop it right now." And it really doesn't work. So, what can teachers do instead?
It's definitely doesn't work, but it's definitely, like, understandable why we do
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
because, like, I said before, like, we're in the emotional parts of our brains and behavior is really triggering, it's really tough, and we're trying to meet our own needs of, like, power and mastery, and we're trying to get the lesson done, and, we've got all of
Yeah.
these pressures as teachers whilst dealing with our own stuff as well. So it's really hard for us to, like, stay calm and not to escalate things, and because we want to sort things out in the moment really quickly.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, the best thing that we can do sometimes is just acknowledge there's an issue with that student, make a plan, and walk away. We don't need to die on every single hill that comes up. Like, we can just get back to teaching the lesson. And that's all tied into what I call my 6 Ps of addressing challenging behavior in the moment. So I'll kind of talk through a little bit. Just say a student is sitting on their phone and,
Yeah.
like, they're being really defiant, like, oh, they shouldn't be on their phone. And if I don't approach this student who's on their phone right now, what's the rest of the class going to think? They're going to think that I don't care that they're on their phone, and that expectation is loose. And so you go over there and you stand over them and you say, get off your phone. And they say no. Of course, they're going to say no. You're being public talking to them. And I mean, sometimes they might say yes. And if they do, that is not as complex of a behavior. But give me your phone. No, I'm not giving you my phone. F off. Give me your phone. Like, give me your phone now, or else this. So we kind of start piling on these, like, consequences, and we start piling on all of this stuff, and it becomes increasingly heated, and there is absolutely no escape from that. Like, there's no way that that is ever going to end well for us, for the
Yeah.
student, for the class. There is just no way it's going to end well. Or instead of doing that, you could use your pace. So you could see that student on their phone and you could very calmly and very quietly walk up to them, slowly, like, approaching them in the most non-confrontational way possible, because you're trying to disarm them a little bit. You could use your proximity and kneel beside them, eyes to the front, not looking directly at them. Again, really non-confrontational body language. You could use your private voice. Are you all right, James? Okay, you're all right? Great. Let's pop your phone away. Thank you. Again, like, using the language of thank you, not please. Like, this approach is not permissive. This approach is strong. This approach is something that is, yes, taking into consideration the needs of the children, but also we need to lead and guide their behaviors using your private voice. So, are you okay? Great. Put your phone away. Thank you. They might say no. No, I'm not putting my phone away. So then you're going to have a situation where you could unlock that other door where you're like, put your phone away, put your phone away, put your phone away. I'm going to take your phone.
Mm.
But they
Mm.
said no. So in that situation, okay, James, you know that you can't use your phone. If you can't use your phone appropriately, you're going to need to hand it in the morning. I'm going to walk away now because I didn't teach the rest of the class. You're trying to
Yeah.
disarm, you're trying to, like, de-escalate it. I need to go teach the rest of the class now. However, I'm going to pop back over in 5 minutes and just see what choice you've made. I'm going to check back in 5. And you walk away. Like, you just walk away.
Oh, I
Like,
love that.
what you're doing is you're completely taking away that standoff. And I'm telling you now, 9 times out of 10, that student will probably sit on their phone for another minute. They're going to look at you. They're going to sit on their phone because they need to feel powerful. They might need to feel a certain way. They might need to save face in front of their peers. They might have a lot of eyes on them. they might push it to 4 minutes until you come back over, and then they'll pop it away. So if they're likely meeting their power need or their love and belonging need or whatever it is they're doing, if you've given them that choice, 9 times out of 10, they will pop it in their pocket. And you're going to get just much further with that approach, even if they don't pop it in their pocket, because you've got a plan, the rest of the class has seen that plan, and then you can catch up with them after the lesson. If they popped it in their pocket on the way out, James, mate, are you okay? Like, it's a bit of a tough lesson. Is there anything I need to know? Okay, you know what happens when we can't put our phones away, or I'm really proud of you for putting your phone away. So having that conversation after the lesson, but it's never going to end well when it's public and it's in the lesson and it's escalating the behavior. So that's obviously, when it comes to these situations, there's always going to be a but what if, but what if, but what if. You can say that, you can say that 300 times, right? But generally that's the base of how I would approach a situation like that.
Oh, that's super helpful. There were a couple things I wanted to hit on, kind of like that idea of saying thank you instead of please, that are just like quick, extremely doable shifts that I feel like teachers could start doing right away. And one of them was the idea of the attention spot. I love the attention spot. Can you talk us through how to start an attention spot of our own?
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Everything we do in a classroom, like every single thing, the way we talk, the way we move, everything is communicating non-verbally to our students. Everything. And the attention spot is one of those
No
things.
pressure.
Like, we really, once we start to tune into the fact that the way is actually a superpower. And I talk to a lot of like quieter teachers that really struggle kind of being a strong presence in the classroom. Them understanding that you don't have to say a word, you can communicate your expectations non-verbally through everything you do. It actually takes the pressure off. And once we're able to tune into these things and understand the power of our non-verbals, you spoke, just before about, I think we were not recording yet, but you spoke about like the 2 classes, and I had this really high academic year 10 class and I had this really low year 8 class. And I say low in inverted commas because I don't believe in like high and low and labeling them in that way necessarily. But the way that I approached them non-verbally was totally different. And the year 10 class, who I thought was going to be the most easy, engaged, excited, bunch of students, ended up being the class that I struggled with most. So it is a lot of pressure to say everything we do communicates to our students. But it's very quick, by the way, really quick little things. And I'll speak about the attention spot now. But once we are tuned in to the way we can use that language, then it can completely, I'm talking like overnight, completely change the way that the behavior is in our classroom. So the attention spot.
It's amazing.
That was a big long aside, wasn't it? So the attention spot is just picking a place front and center where you walk to and stand quietly and stand credibly, and use all your calls to action and your nonverbal hand signals when you're ready to bring a class back to the big group for a chat. And the reason it's so impactful is that the students learn your language. They learn every time we use a nonverbal cue consistently, they learn that language. So if you keep this spot the same, after a while, even just the act of you moving to that spot calmly, quietly, credibly, and standing there still will have students responding and settling down and calming down and regulating. It is like a little bit of magic once you've got it hardwired and once your students know your language.
It's really cool because it seems like such a quick tweak. But if you don't know about it, it's easy to just call from wherever you are. You're over by this group, or you're over in the corner, or you're up at your desk. But it's a simple shift.
Yeah, and just think about like, what message am I sending right now? When I'm standing front and center, the students are going to be wanting to look at me. If you're standing by the door and trying to call for attention, you're halfway out the door. Like, what is that trying to say? If you're up the back of the room and students have to turn around, are you communicating to your students that the message that you're about to send is the most important message and they need to be listening to it? So just thinking about what it's communicating.
So another really helpful strategy that I felt like teachers could just start using tomorrow was the task card, or maybe a task slide. How can teachers build this helpful scaffold into their routines, and why is it so helpful?
Honestly, the task card, don't get me started on the task card, because these are the kind of tools that like I nerd out over massively. And it just demonstrates the fact that classroom management isn't about behavior. It's about everything that we do. And that's why I guess my book's called It's Never Just About the Behavior. Like, and that's why this particular approach, the holistic approach that I teach, is so empowering, because classroom management is something that we embed in everything that we do. And so it's just one pedagogical strategy that is magic for creating that calm learning environment, because it's naturally embedding predictability and clarity and consistency and scaffolding, and it just chunks everything down. Like, it really just is like an all-in-one kind of like tool that I use. So it means, reducing task anxiety. It means that you have less students in shutdown mode or leaving the room or creating distractions. They don't have to face that feeling of failure, because all of a sudden they've got this task in front of them that is super clear. They've got that first step, that tick box on there, and they're like, I can do that, So it chunks it down for them. And it means you're embedding differentiation really naturally each lesson. And I did say before, like, we get differentiation all wrong. And a tool like a task card is differentiation in action, because it just provides access in a really meaningful way. So just say you're giving your students an extended response task, and for some students, writing that amount is too daunting. They're not going to be able to do it. They have had historic failure in English. They haven't been able to access it. They haven't been able to have any kind of success in there. So you chunk it down and you give them some tick boxes. So you might have a tick box that says read the text and circle 3 techniques. You might have a tick box next that says complete the analysis scaffold. So again, like kind of building that scaffolding in. You might have a tick box that says write an opening sentence that uses words from the question. If you want, you can have times next to it to guide them on how long that should take. And then on the task card, you can have anything that you think might help that student be successful. As I said, like a time, some sentence starters, a success criteria that they can then go and assess their work on, everything that they need to feel successful and increase their independence in that task should be there for them. And it just kind of communicates to your students that you're super prepared, you know what's going on, and it's just this beautiful safety net for the task that you're creating for them.
It sounds fantastic. I'm completely sold on the idea, and I feel like it wouldn't be too hard to create a template so that day after day, when you want a task card, you could fill it in about 10 minutes or less.
Yeah, you know what? I have got a template, and I'm going to share it with everybody that's listening. So I'll send you the link.
Oh,
I'll send you the
perfect.
link, and that can be a little gift from me for
That's
your audience.
lovely. Thank you. All right. One thing that was interesting for me in the book that I really like, this is something that I am struggling on a little bit, because I was interested in the chapter that talked about consistency and predictability and how important they are in helping students manage just their expectations and their behavior. If they know what to expect, they'll be more comfortable. And at the same time, I was also holding space for the fact that in my classroom, I was often wanting to surprise my students with an exciting new something. I was unrolling my poetry slam unit, or I was surprising them with the fact that we were going to have a guest theater artist who was going to help us do acting games or whatever. And I felt like that was part of my engagement strategy. And I think for many teachers listening, they also like to bring, new ideas, innovative units that will ask students to push what they're used to in new directions. And so how can teachers be engaging with exciting new lessons, but at the same time create an environment that feels safe and consistent enough that students don't feel, scared and end up in kind of fight or flight or doing low-level behaviors that make things difficult?
Oh, I just love that question. And when I was writing the book, so I was so lucky to have, because my editor through the publisher wasn't a teacher. And she was brilliant. But then I had my friend Amy, who was looking at the manuscripts, and we had a really long discussion about the seating plan. It's one of those things. It's like it's something that is a bread and butter for me. But I understand the fact that a lot of teachers love having like a flexible seating and choice and all of this kind of stuff. You don't have to necessarily keep a seating plan all lesson. It's just something that I make sure students walk into. But when you have the structures working consistently each lesson, so when you have an entry routine, when you have a lesson outline up on the board, a starter activity, when you have some task cards, you're creating that island of safety for students so they can then engage deeply with learning and innovate and be creative. And creativity is a high order skill. It is right up the top of Bloom's, and students simply can't get there if they don't feel safe. Do all students need that level of scaffolding, consistency, and clarity to thrive? No, not all of them. Do all students benefit from it? Does it create a learning environment that's truly inclusive and set up for student success? Absolutely. If you wanted to one day then, so I have done that, like the surprise and delight lessons where you're launching, a new subject, you're doing something that's a little bit different. If my students are used to my classroom being an island of safety, they're going to trust me enough to have the odd lesson where they walk in and the lights are out and there's music on and I've got something else going on, and they're looking around going, oh, what's happening in Miss English's classroom? Because they trust me and it's safe, and they understand that every other lesson, like that, I hold them in that, you know what I mean? So it's okay to also deviate from that from time to time, but that foundation is there, and that's what's most important.
Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. I can see how they can play together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely not a one or the other. Like, as I said about the seating plan, and I just did an episode of the podcast actually about the end of year and how that can get quite chaotic, because it can, like, no matter where you are in the world, like leading up to the Christmas break, it can get like a little bit a little bit looser. So one of the strategies was like get them into the room in their seating plan, and even if they've been in the seating plan for 5 minutes, then you can start your class party. So it's like whatever, the fun thing that you want to do, like the movie or whatever you're allowed to do in your school, I guess. But those structures and those routines are just the thing that provide students with that predictable start. They know what to expect, and it's just the foundation for everything that can then be built on.
So I wanted to talk about the idea in sort of the world of behavior management that relationships are the key. And I have had a past guest sort of talk about how he built relationships with students and how powerful that was for him in his classroom management, and give lots of advice on that. And I totally was excited about what he was saying, and I also agreed with a lot of it. But I also appreciated how your book showcases relationships as a key player in the classroom management game, but not everything. It's not enough just to have good relationships. And for me, this was nice, and maybe other people can relate. If they're a little bit more introverted, it feels overwhelming to try to have 100 new amazing relationships every year that are so deep that they can guide every behavioral situation in class. So let's talk about your perspective on this. Why aren't relationships alone enough? And what else makes up sort of the important walls around that roof of relationships?
Well, relationships can't be everything, because like for some students, they would really struggle to develop a positive relationship with us. And I think that teachers are often told just to build a relationship as like this cover all for behavior, when the students who they're being advised to build a relationship with are actually the students who are the ones that are going to struggle with that the most. So it's something that teachers are often told, but they're going to struggle with, and it's not something that I think relationships are such a huge pillar of what we need to be doing in our classrooms, but it just can't be the one strategy that everybody seems to have and use. You need so much more than that. And we've spoken about so many of them already, like a relationship is built through the predictability that you provide. Like that is safety, that is certainty, like the expectations that you have of them. When we have the discussions with them around their behavior, we're investing in that emotional piggy bank with them and saying, I see you as more than just your behaviors and I care about you. It's the way that you say to them, like, are you all right with this work? Like the relationships can be built in so many different ways, but we can't be everything for every student. And like you were talking about introverts and teachers who aren't naturally like really, those teachers who you look at and you're like, oh my gosh, you are beloved, like, by every single student. I'm not that teacher, but I'm a very safe teacher. I'm a very calm teacher. And even if I don't have these immensely rich relationships on paper that, other teachers might have, that student is going to come to me if they need something because I'm calm, I'm safe, and there's certainty there. So relationships are so important. And yes, we need to be building relationships with our students. However, it is not the relationship, and I'm inverted commas again, because people see relationships in a certain way, don't they? It's not about building friendships. It's not about being buddies. It's not about having banter. It's about being that, adult in the room. And of course you can have jokes, and of course you can, have a bit of a laugh. But if you're one of those teachers that just isn't that funny, out there, beloved teacher, that doesn't mean that your relationships are any less, I don't know, worthy, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. You don't have to be an icon to be a powerful, important person in a student's life.
You don't have to, like, it's not a popularity contest,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay. I could just talk to you all day, Claire, but I know we need to get to our classroom situation soon. But I wanted to finish this kind of question portion with one last thing, and it seems really crucial. It's this idea you have of the transformative talks. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So transformative talks are just my teacher-friendly version of, like, restorative justice chats. If anybody's,
Yeah.
experienced restorative justice. And they're just discussions that you have to resolve behavior with students. But I think a lot of teachers, like, give them a little bit of a bad rap. And I completely understand, because the problem with restorative justice in schools is that teachers are taught these strategies often by non-teachers that have worked in other contexts. But these chats are very long and feel unnatural with the young people that we teach. So my transformative talks are just a teacher-friendly version of kind of applying restoration and, how we talk to our students about the behavior after. And they just kind of follow this general structure, which is, check in and understand what was happening at the time. So, hey, James, like, are you okay? Like, what was going on? How did you feel at the time that happened? Or what was going on for you at the time that happened? The second thing is unpacking the issues and having students really reflect on what happened. So, from your, like, from what you're kind of bringing to the table, like, what do you think happened here? Like, what from your perspective was going on? Like, why do you think I'm chatting to you about this? And have them really reflect on the problems there. What happens when we discuss behavior with students? We often lecture rather than get them to reflect. So all of the transformative talk questions are really reflective, and we're asking and we're not telling. And this part of the transformative talk is just about us trying to raise responsibility, accountability, and get them to reflect on what actually happened and what the harm might have been from that. And then the third thing is just to make a plan for next time. And that's where we can say, okay, like, when you come into the classroom next time and you're feeling like this, or what might I need to put in place if you're feeling anxious about the work, or like anything that we can make a plan with that student to, like, close off the conversation and then give them a fresh start for next lesson. And they can be super short. So just say a student has just been sitting at their desk and they became dysregulated, they ripped up their page and they threw it all over the place. And that student doesn't usually do that. I might have a chat with that student at the end of the lesson saying, hey, Mary, are you all right? Like, today was a bit of a tough one. Like, what happened? Do you think we need to chat about right now? Yes, exactly right. What can happen next time? And now what do we do to make things right? And Mary might say, well, I need to go pick up my papers. So it can be really short, really quick. But the point is just to have students reflect and just to have them take accountability for what happened, but then provide them with the skills or some kind of strategy to make things right and to change things for next time, like something to do next time that's different.
And this transformative talk can actually kind of replace something like detention or, like a specific consequence that sometimes comes through the school system for low-level behaviors or high-level behaviors. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this is what, instead of saying you went to detention, I'll say we need to have a chat after the lesson. Like, this is what I would
Yeah.
classify as as the consequence. And it's really interesting you say that, because often we think that we need to have a tangible consequence on the end of this kind of discussion. But sometimes the fact that they've come to the table, they've reflected, and they've made a plan for next time, that is the consequence of
Yeah.
what's happened. Like the fact that they've shown up, I'll celebrate that. Thank you so much for coming here and reflecting. Like I'm so proud of how you've come. Like you should be so proud of how you've come to the table right now and been able to talk about this. Like, so the way that we think about consequences needs to shift a little bit, because if we're just slapping on a consequence that doesn't have any relevance to the student doesn't have buy-in, it doesn't create any change, there's no point. We're just being punitive. So it needs to make sense. So the example that I gave with Mary, like the consequence for her was she needs to go around and pick up her rubbish,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's so helpful. We're going to move now into the part of the show where we're just going to talk about a few quick classroom issues. The truth is we've already gotten into some of them just over the course of our conversation. A student who wouldn't put their phone away, or a student who got really frustrated doing their work. But I wanted to bring up a couple of others that often come up for teachers who might be listening. So let's dive into the first one. I think probably everyone in teaching has experienced this issue. Let's say you're trying to teach, you've worked up a really lovely lesson plan, and there are just some kids that are in your fifth period who always seem to find each other, no matter the seating plan, no matter if you separate them into different groups. They just find each other and they start talking about their weekend and their social life, and it is so hard to keep them on task. How would you guide a teacher to deal with this group that comes up every single day?
It's such a funny one because we all have these students, don't
Yes.
we? And what we need to remember is that these students, are they being naughty? Are they being disrespectful? Or are they trying to meet their need for love and belonging? Do they not have any buy-in to what's going on? Like, we think our lessons are super exciting, but these students are like, I don't care. Like, I just care about jumping on PlayStation later and making sure that I've teed that up with my friends.
Yeah.
So the thing to remember is that you can't control the behaviors of your students. You are not the puppet master pulling the strings. And I think the more that we understand that we don't have control over another human being, the less pressure we feel to actually control everything that's in our space. You can only control what you can control, is how you respond. So my advice is to divide and conquer. So talk to them about what's going on, but don't talk to them as a group. And I have, people that I mentor that have had this exact situation, and they try to talk to them like in a group or after the lesson. And that's just a fun time for them, because that's just another opportunity for them to have some casual chats, and then they're feeding off each other, and then you're feeling really frustrated and disrespected because they're not listening to you.
Oh,
So
man.
don't talk to them as a group, like talk to them separately. Obviously, if there's already a seating plan, then that's not working. Like, it's not a strategy that's going to work for them because they're not staying in it and they're moving around. Try to leverage your relationships. I always find that I have like a stronger relationship with one of them, so I'll try to leverage that relationship and trying to kind of get buy-in with them. Don't be afraid to escalate it to the parents. Like, if it's something that's really impacting on the class, like, get the parents in. Hey, can we have a chat about what's going on? I'm really worried that they're not engaging in the lesson. Like, is there something that we need to know about? Is there is there something that you think I can do? Is there something that we can work together on to help them engage in English or whatever subject it is? And I always just try to lean into it a little bit and try to kind of get buy-in that way. So I'll say, when there's opportunities for group work, I'll be like, okay, if we can show this lesson that we can work really well separately, next lesson I'm going to be able to get you in the group, and I want to see what you four can do as a group, because you're obviously you're really tight, and I think you could work really, really well together on this project. So show me that we can work separately, and then I'm going to lean into it a little bit, and I'm going to get them together in the next lesson. You'll be able to do this if you can do that. It is a tough one. It's not something that has like one particular answer. The relationships are going to come into play. The relationships between the students are going to come into play. Their abilities in the lesson and how confident they feel with the work. Like, maybe there's some avoidance there. Maybe there's a whole bunch of stuff that could be happening contextually. But they're the kind of things that I'd start to think about. I would talk about, like, where in the rest of the school, when they're in class together, how do they act, and how do they behave, and are there any other strategies teachers use that are really helpful? So those kinds of things are where I'd kind of direct teachers to go.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful list. Let's talk now about a class. Let's say your last period class just has such a hard time staying fully on task. You kind of have low key chat while you're talking. You have just people quickly taking out their phone and quickly sending a text for 30 seconds. Just all these kind of little low level behaviors that make you feel like no one cares about what you're teaching. How would you recommend a teacher kind of deal with those low level behaviors?
Yes, I think every teacher struggles with low level behaviors. It's one of the things that I support teachers with the most. It is
Yeah.
a huge, huge, huge topic, and one that I have a whole course around called the Low Level Behavior Boot Camp, because low level behaviors are such a huge topic and they're so misunderstood, and the advice around them largely sucks when it comes to low level. when it really, really does, and it leaves teachers feeling more disempowered, more lost, more frustrated. When it comes to low level behaviors, it's all about our use of nonverbal pedagogy and crafting a really strong nonverbal teaching persona and having the right strategies that we use in the right way. And we spoke about the power of nonverbals before. But
Mhm.
when we address the individual behaviors of low level behaviors, we're just playing whack a mole every single lesson. Like, oh, that student's on their phone, whack. Oh, those students are talking, whack. Like, we're constantly whack-a-moling all lesson long. And I don't know if any teacher has then sat there at the end of the lesson, just stared at the wall going, what the hell just happened? Like,
Yeah.
I am so tired. Like, and I got nothing done. I was just crowd controlling all lesson, because when we are just approaching low level behaviors as behaviors, we're never going to get anywhere. You'll just spend hours trying to record things. You'll spend the whole lesson trying to address it. You'll spend a bunch of time trying to have discussions and call parents when it's not actually the problem. What we really need to be doing is mitigating those behaviors before they pop up. We've
Mhm.
already spoken about the attention spot, which is the first step of one of the roadmaps. So in the boot camp that I teach, I teach it through 4 different roadmaps that address a lot of common challenges that teachers face with low level behaviors. So, like waiting for attention, feeling like you're
Mhm.
waiting forever, those things that pop up during teacher led instruction, when you give students a task and then all of a sudden they don't do it and they start talking, and you've spent 5-10 minutes giving them instructions and then suddenly they're on their phones, or like they're not doing what you've asked them to do. So all of these low level situations, but one of the roadmaps starts with that attention spot. And then you follow the 6 Ps. So pause, pace, proximity, private voice, and plan. So just say you've done all of the foundational work to try to mitigate the low level behaviors through your teacher presence, through your nonverbal, so your stillness, and trying to model what you want back from your students energetically. If there are then little things that pop up, so that should resolve like 80% of the low level behaviors in front of you, depending on your class. But then you follow this roadmap that I teach for the little spot fires that still pop up. So pausing, usually the pause, and if you're doing it in the right way and presenting yourself in the right way, that's enough to put out the spot fire. If it's not, if it's still escalating, you use your pace, a very slow pace over to the student. We spoke about it with the phone situation. Using your
Mhm.
proximity, so kneeling next to the student, or even just standing behind the student. If you're monitoring exams or something and there's like a student that's like, if you just position yourself behind the student just in their peripheral vision, usually just your proximity will be able to get them back on track. Or if they're doing an independent task and you see them kind of like poking their head up and looking around and trying to get their friend's attention, positioning yourself behind them can be really powerful. Using a private voice all of the time, because when we're trying to model what we want for the rest of the class, if we're trying to model quiet, if we're trying to model calm, and then we're going up to a student going, come on, Henry, come on, let's get on with our work, that's a non I've probably just given all of your listeners a startling task, pulling their coffee down their front. Um, then that's nonverbal permission for the rest of the class to then raise their volume and then plan. So making a plan with that student to get back on track, or talk to them after, or for something to happen in the lesson, without making this a 6-hour podcast episode. the one huge piece of advice that I can offer to anybody listening is to always try to embody the energy that you want to see from your students. Stillness, quiet, regulation, deep breathing, really trying to model the body language and like everything you want to see back from your students. Because when it comes to low level behaviors, your energy is so crucial, which is why a lot of the work I do is on regulation as well. So it might have been just a little bit of a messy talk through of that stuff because I've tried to compress like a 4 hour,
Years of
5 hour,
work.
that kind of boot camp into like a very small space. But yeah, that's kind of where I would start with that. If any of that was, if
Yeah,
any of that was helpful.
absolutely it was. It was so helpful. I feel like it's a good place for us to end. You've given us so many ideas, so many specific strategies that will be helpful, and I appreciate it so much.
Oh, it was so nice to be able to chat to you and your audience.
I know folks listening are going to want to come and follow all your social media channels and find out about all your work. What's the best place for them to start?
Well, if you're just meeting me for the first time, you're listening to a podcast right now, so you can just pop over and listen to my podcast, the Unteachables podcast. And I've got almost 100 episodes now so all the things I've spoken about today, I've got an episode on them. So if you
Yeah.
want to, if you want to dive deeper into something that I've spoken about, just pop over and have a scroll through. You can always reach out to me on Instagram. It's the.unteachables. And if you're struggling with something and want to know where to start, you can always ask me over there. And I know that we've only just met each other, but if you're already like, heck yes, everything you're saying is amazing and I want you to be my mentor immediately, then you can come and join me inside of my Behavior Club, which is my membership for teachers, where you get monthly training and live sessions and resources and everything to make classroom management so much easier and just like you don't have to go it alone. And inside of the Behavior Club is where you'll find the low-level behavior bootcamp I spoke about, or you can get that separately as well. So I can pass on the links.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, Betsy. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks so much for joining Claire and me today for this big conversation about classroom management. I hope you enjoyed your time with Claire as much as I did. I'm going to drop all the links for you in the show notes. So if you want to grab those task card templates, follow Claire on Instagram, or check out any of her courses or membership, I'm going to put that all in the show notes for you. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.